Gonna have to have a lot more in the future.
This isn't a one and done thing. This is a continuous thing through the rest of our life.
Please call or go online now and send your love to the rescue.
Time for a quick check of the headlines. Wind and rain hamper the search for victims and wreckage of Air Asia Flight 8501. 9 bodies recovered so far, and search teams say most of the victims will be found inside the fuselage. Police in China dismissing speculation that the deadly stampede at a New Year's Eve celebration was sparked by a scramble to catch coupons. Police saying the coupons were thrown after the stampede along Shanghai's historic waterfront. 36 people were killed, dozens more injured. And fans bundling up big time to watch the Rose Parade in Pasadena, where temperatures plunged to just above freezing.
Some jarring news now about that massive recall of General Motors vehicles. It involved more than 2 million vehicles with potentially deadly ignition switch problems. The New York Times reports that GM settled several cases out of court, forcing plaintiffs to sign non-disclosure agreements. Could these settlements keep safety information secret and, in the end, put the public at greater risk? An important question. David Wohl is a defense attorney. Doug Burns, former prosecutor. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Doug, first to you.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you guys. First, in this sense, does this idea that there's corporations who are allowed to make products that are potentially deadly, in the case of General Motors, are deadly,
right,
and then they have these settlements, and all of a sudden, when there are more cases, it's not that easy for the general public, for attorneys, for investigators to figure out that this is not an isolated incident, but a pattern?
No, you're making a good point, Leland. I mean, both of us as lawyers would start by saying that, look, you know, confidentiality agreements are very, very common, but your point is an excellent one, and perhaps we should revisit the policy and say that, well, wait a minute, in certain situations where, I mean, here you have these low-torque ignition switches, which in simple English can cause the car to cut out, causing serious, serious problems, and the recall of millions of vehicles, you know, maybe there should be perhaps judicial intervention, I don't know what David thinks, to maybe not have that type of confidentiality.
I guess, David, the question is in cases of product liability where truly people's lives are at risk and there is more than just one of these defective products out there, does the idea of confidentiality actually serve the public interest?
Yeah, we're talking 2 million General Motors cars, Leland. This is a huge problem. I mean, when you talk about settlements going on, confidentiality clauses are very common, like Doug says. They serve a purpose, a positive purpose. They keep the courts uncluttered. They get people their money. They get cases resolved. But in this case, if evidence is actually suppressed in the function of a confidentiality agreement, and people in the future then don't have that evidence, and perhaps more people die than have already died because of these faulty ignition switches, well, then that could subject GM to huge punitive damages in future cases because of the suppression of the evidence. That could take the company down potentially through tens of millions of dollars, or even possible criminal charges if they're seen as suppressing evidence that leads to more deaths. So in these type of cases, I agree with Doug, right on. I mean, they should be banned when public safety is an issue.
All right, well, I've got you guys agreeing on things. A rare situation indeed. Doug, I'll bring this in. The New Year's spirit's incredible around here. There's been a lot of discussion that this case brings to light a larger issue, and that is the unintended consequences of tort reform.
Yes.
In the sense that you have a state like Wisconsin, which limits torts to $350,000 for maximum recovery for pain and suffering, those kinds of things. So suddenly you have these product liability attorneys who work on contingency fees, not willing to take cases against something like General Motors, where the fact of these cases would uncover some really important information.
Well, look, I mean, Leland, you have people who are very strong on both sides of that issue. I mean, of course, you have a lot of people who say, you know, verdicts and recoveries have run amok, and we need to limit them, limit punitive damages, limit non-economic aspects like pain and suffering. And that's a totally viable position. But then you make a great point, which is in reverse. You have a case, I read about it in one of the main articles about this, where a law firm said, we're not taking the case because in Wisconsin there's a $325,000 gap. Exactly like you said. I want to go back to one thing real fast, which was in terms of the confidentiality. You know, GM doesn't want the amount being paid disclosed, so they ought to bifurcate that.
Right, yeah. The question is whether it's one thing to not disclose the amount, it's another thing not to disclose that is safety information.
That's my point.
David, Doug, you guys both agreed on so much. We're going to leave it there.
Hey,
Happy
it's New Year's,
guys.
you know?
Okay.
Happy
New Year, guys.
Well, it is a pretty chilly New Year's Day across much of the nation, but instead of bundling up, some folks are stripping down. Yes, it's those crazy polar bears shivering for a good cause.